in
Good morning, the esteemed faculty for today. Raghu Raman ji, Chairman Ahmedabad Branch CA Harit Dhariwal, Vice Chairman CA Bhishan Shah, CA Rahul Maliwal, senior members, and my dear friends. A very good morning. We are glad that even on Saturday morning, members have joined us. Thank you so much. Let's begin the session with ICI motto. Request Sejaz Bhai to play the same.
येष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति येष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्विमाणः निर्विमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्वैता 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 एतद्वैता
Request all to mute themselves. Now I would request Chairman Ahmedabad Branch CA Harit Dhariwal, who is just going to kickstart the day. 2 meetings today, followed by the fifth vaccination drive. Up till now, we have vaccinated more than 550 CA members, and the fifth drive is going to start today, followed by the sixth drive tomorrow. So request Chairman Ahmedabad Branch to give opening remarks.
Thank you, Anjali Ben. Respected faculty for the session, Advocate Raghu Raman sir from Bangalore who has joined us virtually, the Vice Chairman of the branch CA Bhishan Shah, the Secretary Anjali Ben, our CP Committee Chairman Rahul Maliwal, and all the dear friends. A very good morning to everyone. I think first of all, let me thank Bhishan Bhai and I think more first Advocate Raghu Raman sir for agreeing to come on this very important topic, that is on the judgment on limitation that was given by Supreme Court. I think second topic is very important also on the e-invoicing. So both the topics are very important, and thank you all for joining today. Two important announcements. First, I think as Anjali Ben said, vaccination drive is going on at full strength at Ahmedabad branch. Today we have the fourth drive at Tagore Hall from 3 to 5 p.m. So all the committee members will be there. So in case you have any assistance before that, please contact us. Tomorrow morning 10 to 12 we have the fifth drive, and again it is full. I think we have we opened it yesterday, and within 1 hour all the seats are full for that. So thank you for the response, and I'm sure we're going to have next drive coming in soon. Tomorrow morning we have a very important session for the students. We have a GST series going on for Vikasa Vikasa Ahmedabad, and tomorrow is a topic on ITC taken by Hem Charjit. So please tell your articles to join it. It's a virtual session. Tomorrow evening 2 to 6 is a very important topic for the bank audits for students. So we have done this time a special 4-hour session for the CA students on the bank audit, wherein the basics of bank audit, documentation, IRAC norms, provisioning, all from the viewpoint of articles. So they will be guided on that. So 2 to 6 tomorrow virtual is our bank audit seminar for CA students. And tomorrow evening we are keeping a very small holy get together at branch. It's a small play that students have prepared, but it's only 50 people who will be there in the auditorium. It's with full social distancing, and it's all on virtual basis. So tell your articles to join virtually, because it's a one of its kind, wherein they'll be giving us the importance of the mythology behind Holi, plus the importance of color. There are people who have prepared some skits, some speeches. So it's a nice interaction. Again, please join us virtually. And with this, I think I'm also going to update on the new events that are coming up. First is on the we are going to have a session on the recent amendments on the finance bill, and also on the amendment in the Companies Act. So that's going to happen in the next week. With this, I thank you all once again for joining in, and thank you, respected Raghu Raman sir, for taking today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman sir, for giving us this opportunity to have a discussion on one judgment and e-invoicing. I'm thankful to Anjali ma'am, Secretary of the branch, Managing Committee member Rahul Maliwal, and Coordinator Neha Shah. Sir, we welcome you, and it's a pleasure that we are going to discuss on this suo motu order of Supreme Court, which the story was started. I can say that Supreme Court was proactive at that time. So they said that limitation will not applicable during this Corona period. And now they have ended it, understanding that the severity of the COVID-19 is much lesser, and now it should be limitation should be implemented. So it is going to affect so much refunds, assessment, even transitional credits in GST, where High Court of Delhi, I guess, they said that limitation will be applicable for trans 1 returns till 30th June 2020, and which is also coming between this COVID period. So whether that limitation will also be extended with this judgment or not. So definitely we would like to learn more from you, sir. And thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And now you are going to guide us on those very topics. So now I request CA Neha Shah to introduce in brief today's learned faculty, CA Advocate Raghuraman, sir. Thank you.
A very warm good morning to all my respected seniors in the profession, all my colleagues, and our speaker faculty, Mr. V. Raghuraman, sir. I am Neha Shah, and I take pleasure in introducing our faculty for the day, Sir V. Raghuraman. He has been a practicing advocate since past 30 years with expertise in the field of indirect taxation, GST, excise, customs. He has been a rank holder chartered accountant in his entire journey. He has so many achievements in his bouquet. He has been a visiting faculty with the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. He has addressed many gatherings of eminent professionals, faculties, and he has enlightened so many professionals with his intellectual knowledge and his deep understanding of the law. And today I'm very happy that he is with us to discuss the recent judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court on Limitation Act. And I'm sure that all the members of our branch would have a very great learning experience listening to him. So I thank you, sir, for being here with us, and would request you to take over and enlighten us on this burning issue. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. I thank the Ahmedabad branch for inviting me to share a few thoughts on this rather important topic. What we have to explore in this session would be whether this order will override the statutory provisions which are present, will override several limitation orders which have been made by the High Court or other courts. Whether, if I have not filed any appeals or applications, even as, let us take an example, even Sabka Vishwas, if I have not filed, can I file it now? These are the things that we are going to explore in this session. Before we explore it, let us see what is the order that has been passed first by the Supreme Court, because that is very important for us to understand. So when we see the order, is it available on screen for the people, or if it is not, I will just read it out because that is very important for us.
Yes, sir. You please read it. I'll try to.
Yeah, don't bother.
Okay.
This court has taken suo motu cognizance of the situation arising out of challenge faced by the country on account of COVID-19 virus and the resultant difficulties that may be faced by litigants across the country in filing their petitions, applications, suits, appeals. This is very important. All other proceedings within the period of limitation prescribed under the general law of limitation or under special laws, both central and or state. So this is the scope of the suo motu petition that they have taken. Now one should understand what is the suo motu power of the Supreme Court? Where does it come from? You should all understand that the Supreme Court, being the last court of record in this country, High Court is a court of record, Supreme Court is a court of record. Court of record means that they can punish for contempt any act not only done in the Supreme Court but even for in the courts below. Similarly, Article 141 and 142 of the Constitution gives certain special powers to the Supreme Court. In Article 141, the law which is declared by the Supreme Court is binding on all courts within the territory of India. It is the first principle. If a law is declared by Supreme Court, it becomes a law for the country. Everybody is bound by it. Article 142 is very important because if there is any cause or matter which is pending in the Supreme Court and the court passes orders, it is enabled to pass any order. Why? To do justice in the matter. So 142 gives almost, I would say, unparalleled powers to the Supreme Court, undefined powers to the Supreme Court to pass any order to do justice in any cause or matter. 142 says any cause or any matter. So you must view all these orders in this backdrop. One is that this suo motu cognizance that the Supreme Court has taken. Having taken suo motu cognizance, whatever order the Supreme Court passes is binding on all the courts in India. 1, 2. Not only is it binding on the courts in India, the executive are bound to follow this order and in fact implement this order. Please keep this in mind also. 3. Any cause or matter pending in the Supreme Court can pass an order which will do justice. And the term used in 142, complete justice. So this you should keep in mind. Supreme Court is vested with the powers of doing complete justice. Now we will see how this order came about. The only reason it came about was that once the COVID came, courts had to virtually shut down in a hurry. On 23/3/2020, the court said that this is the order was passed on 23rd of March. The court said that in second paragraph, we are to obviate the difficulties and ensure that lawyers and litigants don't have to come to physically file. Period of limitation in all proceedings, irrespective of the limitation prescribed under the general law, special law, this is very important, whether condonable or not, shall stand extended with effect from 15th March 2020 till further orders to be passed by this court. We are exercising this power under Article 142, read with Article 141, and declare that this order is a binding order within the meaning of Article 141 on all courts, tribunals, and authorities. So the order is very clear. The order says if there is any petition which is pending, an application has to be done, a suit has to be filed, appeals have to be filed, any other proceedings have to be done. Period of limitation will have to be necessarily extended by virtue of this order, and whether the period of limitation is condonable or not. For example, GST law will say an appeal has to be filed within 3 months plus 1 month. Earlier service tax, we had different provisions. Excise, we have separate provisions. So what the Supreme Court said is, whether it's a general law or special law, whether it's a civil law or it's a specialized law like the indirect tax or direct taxes law, wherever anything is pending, the period of limitation will be automatically increased. Once this order came, there were doubts in the minds of the government and the public. What about proceedings under the Arbitration Act, where certain time-bound replies, time-bound action has to be taken? There was also doubt about proceedings under the Negotiable Instruments Act. Then Supreme Court clarified those issues by issuing subsequent orders. Arbitration, how the things get extended. What happens under 138 of the CRPC in terms of negotiable, 138 of Negotiable Instruments Act in terms of action to be taken. Supreme Court clarified all these issues from time to time. And then finally, Supreme Court thought that the period of extension has to be put to an end because it's almost a year. So they took up the suo motu writ petition. Please understand, this proceeding is a writ petition under Article 32 or 141, 142. Fundamental rights may have been affected. So writ petition of civil has been filed with the Supreme Court. It's a suo motu writ petition. Suo motu writ petition means that the Supreme Court by itself asks the writ petition to be registered. That is the powers of the Supreme Court, and passes orders. Maybe I feel if the Supreme Court had waited for another 1 month, they may have even deferred passing this order, because this COVID has made a grand comeback into many states in the country. It is not as grand as it was last year, but it is still worrisome. It is going very well. Nevertheless, let us look at what the Supreme Court says now. Due to the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, this court took suo motu cognizance of the situation arising from difficulties that may be faced by litigants across the country in filing petition, application, suit, appeals, all other proceedings within the period of limitation prescribed in the general law of limitation or under any special laws, both central or state. By an order dated 27/3/2020, this court extended the period of limitation prescribed from 15/3/2020 till further orders. The order dated 15/3/2020 was extended from time to time. Though we have not seen the end of the pandemic, there is a considerable improvement. Lockdown has been lifted and the country is returning to normalcy. All courts, tribunals are functioning. We are therefore of the opinion that the order of 15/3/2020 has served its purpose. Now what they say? What are the directions issued now? They are closing this writ petition and they are issuing directions. First, they say, in computing the period of limitation for any suit, appeal, application, or proceeding, the period from 15/3/2020 till 14/3/2021 shall stand excluded. Consequently, the balance period of limitation remaining as on 15/3/2020, if any, shall become available with effect from 15/3/2021. What is the effect of this? If I have to, let us assume I have to bring an appeal within 3 months time. I have not bought it. And the 3 months time expires between the period 15/3/2020 till 14/3/2021. If it falls in that period, then automatically the balance period of limitation that I could have had and I could not find. Let us assume that my order came on 14/2/2020. I have to file an appeal in 3 months, that is by 14/5/2020. The period between 15/3/2020 and 14/5/2020 stands excluded. The 2 months period now will be added. Of course, the Supreme Court says now gives me 90 days as per this order. How do we calculate this? Is that if the period of limitation fell within this period, 15/3/2020 till 14/3/2021, to that extent, my proceedings will be saved if I have not taken any proceedings in this period. There are two distinct things that happen. Let us assume that my period of limitation stopped before 15/3/2020. This is the first case which we will take. Let's assume I should have filed the period of limitation. Let us say if I have to file an appeal by 14/3/2020. I have not filed the appeal, including the condonable period of 4 months. If that 4 months falls before 15/3/2020, I do not have any relief under this order. Let's be very clear. I don't have any relief. If the 4-month period, 3 + 1 month period expires before 15/3/2020, this order will not help me. Let us be clear on that. But if the 3 months + 1 month falls within the period that is 15/3/2020 till 14/3/2021, I will have this benefit of this order. Therefore, if my appeal period is ending on 14/5/2020, I will have the benefit of this order. Now I have another 90 days from the date of this order to file my appeal. That is the effect of para 1 of this order. Let us assume that I needed to make an application, and that period of application fell within this period, 15/3/2020 till 14/3/2021. Automatically, it will get extended. Let us assume that the Delhi High Court, here we don't assume, the Delhi High Court did say that all Tran 1 applications should be made within the 3-year period. Within the 3-year period of limitation. The 3-year period of limitation fell on 30/6/2020, which falls within this period, and therefore it will get automatically extended. Automatically it gets extended. I have no doubt about this. There is nothing, no conflict between the judgment of the Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court. All that the Supreme Court order says is if your period of limitation falls within this period, if it falls within this period, then necessarily it has to be extended. That's all it says. And that period will be excluded. So therefore, the period from 15/3/2020 till 30/6/2020 gets excluded as far as the Tran 1 applications are concerned, and they will be added to the period of limitation. It comes to roughly about 2.5 months. Supreme Court, however, says in para 2 that the limitation will be the actual balance or 90 days, whichever is more. In other words, if your actual balance of limitation is 6 months, it will be 6 months. If your actual balance of limitation, like in our example, is 2.5 months, it will be 90 days. That is 3 months. It's not 3 months, it is 90 days. So you have to calculate exactly 90 days. From 90 days calculation, you should do. And when you say 90 days from 15/3/2021, it would mean that the day from which it starts is excluded. But the General Clauses Act, the day from which an action is to be taken is excluded. And the day to which will be included. In other words, 90 days will be calculated starting from 16/3/2021. You calculate 90 days, you have that time. Now, one question that arises in all this: what happens if the statute prescribes a limitation period? Can can an order be passed befores the statutory period of limitation? Can power under 142 be exercised, Article 142 be exercised, without keeping in mind the statutory provisions? No, there are several decisions of the Supreme Court where they say that the power under 142 is not, you cannot be used to circumvent the statutory provisions. But here, I would like to tell all the, generally the department will take this stance before the Supreme Court itself, it is going to come up sometime. That this 142 order cannot sidestep the limitation in statutes. Are you circumventing the statutory period? And I'm very sure the Supreme Court will remind the department that they're not circumventing any statutory provisions because of the pandemic which affected the entire world. They are only extending a period of limitation. They are not sidestepping the statutory provisions. Will you please keep this in mind? If any of these matters come up in courts, especially Gujarat is known for, is a fertile ground for litigation. If any of these matters come to the courts, we must remember to tell the courts that the order for COVID under Article 142 read with 141 was not meant to sidestep any statutory provision or was not meant to circumvent any statutory provision. It was only meant to extend the period of limitation if that period fell between 15/3/2020 and 14/3/2021. It is not a blanket order which says forever and ever, amen, your period of limitation is going to be extended. The Supreme Court has not said that. So I'm very clear in my mind, at least, that if the period of limitation for an appeal fell in this period between these two dates, you have a 90-day window, you can file the appeal. There will be no need for even condonation of delay application in my humble view because of the order of the Supreme Court. This is binding on all tribunals, binding on all authorities, binding on all courts, including the High Court. This entire period has to be excluded. Application. Now let us come to Sabka Vishwas scheme, for example. Sabka Vishwas scheme ended on, let us say, 31/12/2019, extended to 15/1, further extended to 36. In fact, by orders, it was extended to 31st August 2020 because of the insertion of section 168A of the CGST Act. They inserted 168A of the CGST Act to, because of the COVID, to extend several dates which get announced by the government. Issued notification 35/2020 or something, which they issued, which was amended later, where they kept extending the dates in certain matters. But the question which will come is, in all these cases where the GST legislation itself is extending matters under section 168A, can I take the benefit of this order in the Supreme Court? Let us assume, we'll take an example. Sabka Vishwas scheme. Sabka Vishwas scheme ended on 31/8/2020 because of all the extensions which were given. Can I take the benefit of this Supreme Court order and now file a declaration under Sabka Vishwas? It's another thing that the website doesn't allow you to enter today. Can I then file a manual application before the authorities for Sabka Vishwas scheme? The question is, in the light of a specific statutory provision 168A, which was extending the periods from time to time, based on economic policies of the government, will this Supreme Court order stand good or will it not be good? Can it be said that this Supreme Court order will not apply to specific statutory extensions where the statute itself is dealing with it. The question that would then arise is, if we were to interpret that statutory limitations have prescribed certain dates, certain other statutes, no dates have been prescribed by oversight. Wherever the government has by oversight not prescribed any statutory limits, the Supreme Court order will apply. Wherever the prescribed limits, the Supreme Court order will not apply. That means you have two sets of cases. Both are affected by COVID. One, you extend the date, one, you forget to extend the date. So government's inaction leads to discrimination under Article 14. Can that stand in a court of law? In my humble view, irrespective of the extensions that have been given under Section 168A by the central government, I am of the view that this order of the Supreme Court will apply. Reason being, Supreme Court says any limitation for any application under any special or general statute, if that limitation were to expire during this period, 15/3/2020 till 14/3/2021, then it stands automatically extended. I am very sure that this is going to be contested by the government up to the Supreme Court itself. The Supreme Court will be asked to interpret what happens if today I file a Sabka Vishwas scheme and the government rejects it. I go to the High Court. What happens? In my view, all the last dates that fell within this two periods, in counting the period of limitation, automatically those dates would be excluded and new dates will have to be calculated. When we look at the provisions of the Limitation Act, Section 5, Section 14, Section 29, what specifically they say is, in computing the period of limitation, certain acts to certain time periods are not taken into account. For example, Section 5 will say, for sufficient cause, it can be shown that your delay has happened because of sufficient cause. You are persecuting, let us say, the matter before some other court in good faith when you're not supposed to do so. These kind of activities, these kind of actions can be condoned. The limitation period can be extended in such certain cases under 5 and 14. Section 29 would say that if there is a special statute excluding the Limitation Act, then that will apply. Otherwise, the Limitation Act will apply. So what the Limitation Act does is that it, please understand this principle. The Limitation Act is a procedural act. Limitation does not take away your rights. It only frustrates your rights. Your vested right will always remain, but because of the time period, it gets frustrated. So therefore, a Limitation Act, the Supreme Court has held, is nothing but a procedural act. It frustrates the limitation. It may frustrate your right or a liability, as the case may be, but it does not take away the right or liability. Those will remain. So in our example, in a Sabka Vishwas application, which I could have done before 31/8/2020, I am of the humble opinion that because the limitation period fell, the last date fell within this period, it should get extended. I'm very sure the government will argue that this order will not extend to specific dates specified in special statutes. They are going to argue this case, and I'm very sure we are going to have a whole lot of litigation now because of this order as to whether appeals can be now admitted, whether applications can be admitted, proceedings can be admitted. What do you mean by any proceeding? Is it any proceeding? In the nature of suit, appeal, application, or any other proceeding. My view, every one of these categories, please look at the categories which are there. Petitions, applications, suits, appeals, all other proceedings. It is not any other proceeding, all other proceedings. So all other proceedings, means can be every proceeding that is there. I have to file petitions within a particular time period. You please see the first paragraph of this order. Due to the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, this court took suo motu cognizance of the situation arising from difficulties that may be faced by litigants across the country in filing petitions, in filing applications, in filing suits, in filing appeals, in filing all other proceedings within the period of limitation prescribed under the general law of limitation or under any special law, both central and state. So if you read this first paragraph in the decision, it becomes clear that if the last date for filing an application falls between 15/3/2020 till 14/3/2021, that will get automatically extended for another 90 days. So in my humble view, your Sabka Vishwas or Sabka, whatever you may call all these Vishwas schemes, which the government has announced, you can still go ahead and file the applications within the next 90 days, which are available to you. If your last date for filing the appeal fell within this period, you can go ahead and file you have a period of 90 days now to file the appeals. If you have any other proceedings which you had to file, you have not filed it, this you can do within the next 90 days, and the entire period, this would be excluded. But if that period fell before 15/3/2020, the last date fell before 15/3/2020, there is already Justice Ram Subramanian's decision of the Supreme Court where he says that if this period fell before, if your period of limitation got exhausted before 15/3/2020, you cannot take a benefit of this order. So that is the only exception I can see. Now we come to paragraph 2. In cases where the limitation would have expired during the period between 15/3/2020 till 14/3/2021, notwithstanding the actual period of limitation remaining, all persons shall have a limitation of 90 days from 15/3/2021. In the event the actual balance period of limitation remaining with effect from 15/3/2021 is greater than 90 days, that longer period shall apply. Please understand, this will apply to the government as much as it applies to the citizens. This is what we are going to face. Departmental appeals which have not been filed in time, what happens? Department will take the plea that the period between 15/3/2020 to 14/3/2021 has to be excluded, and that delays will have to be automatically condoned, and we still have another 90 days to file. So if the department has not filed any appeals, which period of limitation fell between these two dates, they will also have to file this within the next 90 days. Now the question that will come is, if they don't file within the next 90 days, can they do it with condonation? My humble view on this would be, paragraph 2 does not allow any scope for any further condonation. You have a longer period of limitation, use it from 14/3/2021. Otherwise, it is 90 days. beyond 90 days, whether it is the government appeal or whether it is the party appeal, you will lose the right. You have taken the benefit of almost 1 year now in delay. If you delay beyond next 90 days or a longer period of limitation, neither the party nor the government is going to benefit. They will be losing. In my humble view, paragraph 2 does not extend, does not allow further extension beyond 90 days. Then you come to paragraph 3. The period from 15/3/2020 till 14/3/2021 shall also stand excluded in computing the periods prescribed under section 23(4), 29A of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, section 12A of the Commercial Courts Act 2015, and provisos B and C of section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act, and any other laws which prescribe periods of limitation for instituting proceedings, outer limits within which court or tribunal can condone delay, and termination of proceedings. This paragraph is very clear. This entire period of 1 year will be taken out in any other proceeding under any other law. Wherever an outer limit is given, an outer limit may be given that let us say the written statement has to be filed within 60 days. Order has to be passed within 2 months. These kind of limitations, if they are prescribed in a statute, whether it is Arbitration Act or Commercial Act or Negotiable Instrument or any other law, these outer limits will be stretched by another 1 year, which is 15/3/2020 till 14/3/2021. This period will be excluded. The entire 1 year gets excluded. Therefore, in a nutshell, what we should remember here is this. Point number 1. These orders have been passed under the provisions of Article 141 and Article 142 of the Constitution. Supreme Court can do complete justice in any cause or matter which is pending before them. Supreme Court filed a suo motu writ petition and extended the period of limitation by 1 year between these two dates. Any application, any appeal, any suit where the period of limitation expires or the last date expires between these two dates will get automatically extended. Extended means from 14/3/2021, you have 90 days time or a longer period under the statute, whichever is more. Proposition 5, if you file the appeal beyond these dates of limitation which the Supreme Court has prescribed, whether it's the government or whether it is the litigant party, there is no further continuation of delay which is allowed in respect of this. This order of the Supreme Court does not circumvent any statutory provisions. It only alleviates the difficulty that was faced because of COVID. This order of the Supreme Court will apply to all statutes, whether it is general or special. Whether the limitation was condonable or not condonable, please understand this. In Singh Enterprises case, the Supreme Court held that central excise appeals where an outer limit was fixed for condonation, you cannot condone beyond that period. That is what the Supreme Court said. Can it be done in writ proceedings? It went to GlaxoSmithKline, where the Supreme Court said you cannot pass an order under 142 undoing statutory provisions. That's what the Supreme Court said in GlaxoSmithKline Pharma's case. But when it comes to COVID order, my humble view is that this does not circumvent the statutory provisions. In fact, it alleviates the problems that have been faced by both government and the private parties. All it does is to extend the period of limitation, and in so doing, it is not circumventing any statutory provision. Therefore, in my humble view, if you have not made any appeals or application or suit or proceedings where the last date fell between these two dates, You are now welcome to do it within the period of 90 days, starting from 14/3/2021. In case supplications are not accepted by the department for the reason that you cannot do it online, please file it manually. Supposing you go manually and it is the officer rejects to take it, please serve it by courier with acknowledgement and keep it with you. Since I've almost come to the end of what I have to say, and I have around 10 minutes left, I request our organizers to, I'll give it back to them so that I could answer the questions in the next 10 minutes.
So thank you very much, sir. And I request all the participants, if they are having any questions, then please put them in chat box. Before that, sir,
You can ask me
also some-
questions. Mr. Bishan
Yes,
is
sir.
Mr. Bishan is my contact point in Ahmedabad. He is a very dynamic chartered accountant, I must say. And he has come to Supreme Court also in that Calcutta Clubs case. He was actively involved in that also. So it's good to see you. Tell me, sir.
Great, sir. Sir, I have one question that as GST 3B returns due date is 20th March 2020 for the month of February. Can that return date will be extended? And time to time, every month we are having due dates in GST. So all those due dates, will those due dates will be extended with this order or not?
In my humble view, all the dates will get extended because they fall within the.
So we are not required to pay late fees or interest for the delay payment even in case of GST. If we have not paid for those
Yes.
months in time, then definitely we can discharge this duty or payment in this 90 days. Sir, one more question is that in case of service tax, there is a extended period. So 5 years are covered from a specific date. So department can issue a show cause notice, say for the period of 14-15
Understood.
by
Understood.
25th of April 2020. Now,
Understood.
they said that this period will also be not considered or not included, say for 15-16. So this whole year will not be included. That is what I think so. Sir, what's your view?
You see, the department has also taken advantage of this order. They are saying that if the limitation fell within this period, it gets automatically extended. That means to say, you look at 15/3/2020 as the cutoff date. 15/3/2020 is the cutoff date. Was the year 14-15? When did you have to file the returns? Service tax returns for 14-15.
By 25th April.
No. April to September 2014 would be October 2014. So that the department cannot now demand because that is the 5 years fell in October 2019, which is before 15/3, and as by virtue of Justice Ram Subramanian's order, department can't take benefit of it. That is one. Period between October 2014 to March 2015 fell in April 2020 would have been the limitation. There they can take the advantage. So the advantage the department will have is that 6 months, not more than that. That is how I would read it.
Has
Sir,
some
no, I
questions, sir.
If they can give you demand for this by taking advantage of this, there is no reason why you cannot take advantage of this. For example, you filed the 3B, you are not paid the tax. I mean, that kind of a situation generally doesn't arise because you have to pay the tax and then only file the 3B. You have done nothing of this. I don't see any reason why you can't take advantage of this.
So Nitesh has one question, sir.
Nitesh Jain ji, how are you?
Yeah, fine, sir. Very good morning, sir.
Morning, sir. Tell me, sir.
Sir, the question is, the party filed the SVLDRS application within the time limit that was prescribed in December.
And they did not
20.
pay. They did not pay the
and,
amounts.
Yeah, the application was approved in dead middle of the lockdown on the April 2020.
That was when it was approved.
Yes, it was approved. So
why they took so long?
The process took long because they were also under lockdown, and it was extended till 30th June for them.
And it went on to 31st August also, in my opinion, because
Yeah,
of 35
it
or
did.
2020.
Yeah,
You can pay now. You can pay.
So I've already paid in March of 21.
Yes.
Already paid and informed them.
Yes.
So
they have to give the discharge certificate. If they do not give the discharge certificate, approach the High Court. You people are doing it regularly. Do it. You will definitely get relief.
Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, that was the question. Thank you.
Sir, in case of income tax also, return due date is 31st March 2020 at that time. So I guess it will also be extended with your deliberation
Absolutely.
and discussion.
This is my interpretation of this order. They have not cut it to any particular statute. They have cut it across the statutes.
So even same applies to the assessment proceeding. Like they are, if the due date for the assessment is 143,
yes,
like
it gets extended.
March, yes, then it will also be this period of limitation. 1 year will not be considered.
It will not be counted for this purpose. Absolutely. If the department takes advantage, you can also take. It's not. It's a advantage by meaning. I'm saying, it applies to both equally.
So, sir, even in as we are thinking of GST returns, there are certain due dates in case of TDS also. I am required to deposit TDS on time to time. So that will also be not be treated as a delay. So when I am filing or doing audit, tax audit of any SSE, then if there is a delay or not, I can take the cognizance of this order.
Yes, you can take the cognizance of the order, and I'm only hoping that the Supreme Court does not clarify this order by saying it only applies to proceedings and not to regular procedures which are contemplated in the Act. If they say that, you're in trouble, man. I'm telling you this. Keep this in mind. Keep this in mind, because they may say it applies only to suits, applications, appeals, all other proceedings. Filing of a return is not a proceeding.
But sir, all other proceedings means that is in third para. In
first para you take. I'm just telling you, this is what the department is going to tell you. You please be ready for it.
Ready for it. Yes.
Please be ready for it. That's all. Keep all your defenses ready now itself. Tell all your seniors, senior counsels in Gujarat, this is what is going to happen, sir. Please keep your ammunition and arms ready for all this. They will come out with some novel idea that this does not cover, monthly returns, TDS, and this and that, and then you have to find some way out of it. See, that means you can say, see, what will happen is that you can also tell the department has to do something. What they talk of initiation of any proceedings, initiation of any appeal, initiation of any suit, initiation of application. So your returns, strictly speaking, don't fall within any of these parameters, strictly speaking. So your GST or 3B return or your TDS returns don't follow in this parameter. I am only hoping that this is given a wider meaning by the Supreme Court. And if it is narrowed down, we are in trouble with all this. Keep this in mind.
Agreed, sir. Deep Thakkar wants to ask one question, and that's the last question, sir. He says that in late fees also, whether it is applicable or not, that is what we have discussed.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying, you see, you please take the benefit of this. When you get notice, say it is covered by Supreme Court order, they will say it does not cover your regular filing of application, returns. You have to fight it out. And hope that the Supreme Court doesn't give you any further clarification which says it doesn't apply to returns. If they say so, we are doomed.
So, sir, thank you very much for taking your time from your busy schedule. And I request CA Mayur Moda to give vote of thanks to our learned faculty, Raghuraman sir.
Thank you, Bishan bhai. And thank you, Raghuraman Sarji, for enlightening us on this Supreme Court judgment, which is we can use in both way. As you said last, that keep your arms ready if they challenge you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now we are going to start our next session on e-invoice, which is going to be implemented for the SSEs or taxpayer having turnover more than 50 crores in last 3 years. So now I request Neeraj Hatti Singh ji from Signet to deliver on the topic. Sir, we at Ahmedabad branch of WRC of ICAI welcomes you, and we are eager to listen from you on this topic, e-invoicing. I guess it is going to affect so many SSEs from 1st April, and there are some nuances of this topic. Sir, we welcome you, and I request you to deliberate on the topic. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bishan Bhai, and thanks to the ICISI Ahmedabad chapter for inviting us for this particular session. And I would request all members to make it as interactive as possible, because you have gone through the e-invoicing mandates multiple times for the 500 crore plus company plus 100 crore plus company. But we will go a little bit more in depth in terms of what is the type of changes that are going to come, how it's going to be more applicable, and what are some particular aspects that needs to be taken care into the whole process. So I have my colleague CA Kunal Shah, who's also going to help into this presentation. So Kunal, can you just update the presentation?
Okay.
And I request all the participants, if you are having any questions during the presentation, then please do type the same in chat box, and so we can definitely take the benefit of Neeraj sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I think invoicing has been applicable from 1st October 2020, and the rollout was for 500 plus crore companies initially. Then it was brought down to 100 crore plus companies from 1st January 2021. And now for companies of turnover 50 crores and above, it will be applicable from 1st April 2021. Now this is kind of, it has been a watershed change in terms of how the invoicing is being done into India. For the first time, we have centralized, or we can say we have streamlined the way we do invoicing. The formats has been very clearly crystal clear, and it has been done with the help of Institute of Chartered Accountants. So the inputs from the CA fraternity has been taken care into it. The actual reasons for invoicing is that it allows interpretability of data for seamless flow of transactions. And what the objective from the government and was that whatever invoices are being generated by one party should be easily imported into the other ERP. And once now we have the 50 crore plus companies, plus we have more of the small medium organizations, so it will go down up to maybe 5 crore companies in a next 6 to 9 months. Then all of them will be using a specific software or an accounting software, which will help kind of import the data automatically, and they will be able to generate the invoice completely. So this will reduce actually the data entry work, will reduce the fraudulent claims of input tax credit, and I will put across some specific points that the CA fraternity needs to take care when they are verifying the input invoices, because we have started seeing invoices with duplicate QR codes already coming into the existence. So there are multiple challenges to it. We will discuss a little bit deeper into the presentation. It also enables auto population of return and e-bills, because now whatever invoicing are being generated is absolutely getting auto populated into GSTR1, and with to be stabilizing over a period of time, the returns will also get auto populated. And reporting of the invoice to the central system with the types of volumes that we have seen up till now, except for a few kind of roadblocks that we have seen in last 15 days, more or less the systems have been quite stable in terms of the invoicing. So it has been a good rollout compared to the 2017 GSTN aspects that we had. And things are quite smooth into the way invoicing is working. Even the e-way bills are getting generated simultaneously with the e-invoicing. So that is a kind of a major benefit that is there. Yeah, Kunal, next slide, you would like to. So we'll just see the basic scenario. IRA is currently generated and provided by the IRAs. It is not generated from the taxpayers end, but we just receive the details from the IRA. The invoices are uploaded and the response is received by almost real time basis. And they allow us to cancel the invoices within 24 hours. In case there are any changes after 24 hours. Voice is not clear, Kunal. Your voice is not clear. Yeah, just a second. I think you use this.
Hi everyone, I hope it's now clear.
Yes, clear.
Yes, Vishen. So currently we are allowed to generate, do any cancellations for the invoices within 24 hours. After that, it is not possible to cancel, but we can still amend the details once it is auto-populated to GSTR1. And in case of cancellation, we have an option to issue the credit notes.
So I would want to add one clear point, and that you need to educate your clients onto it. So the way the GSTN system will be working is that if you want to cancel the e-invoice within 24 hours, you can cancel it on the IRP portal, and that data will get auto-populated to the GSTN. But if you do not cancel within 24 hours, and if you are canceling subsequently the same invoice on the GSTN portal, you are still allowed to do that. But in that particular case, the record will be maintained into the GSTN system. So we have seen certain clients who have raised maybe 1,000 invoices and canceled maybe 600 invoices out of it within a specific period of time. Then those records will be available with the assessing authorities. It will be available to the kind of GSTN officers, and they will definitely ask questions around it. So it is very important to be sure to have a proper mechanism by which you are not generating wrong invoices and uploading onto the portal, which subsequently you may have to cancel. So this is one particular area I would really request our chartered accountant friends to educate their clients onto this particular point.
So here, Neeraj bhai, is there any stipulation or a time in which I am required to generate IRN? So if say I have generate a tax invoice today, then is it possible that I will generate IRN after 15 days or 10 days or something like that?
This is the kind of this is a very interesting point. So there are two different aspects, and let us take the aspect of goods that is happening. Now, for a goods that you are delivering, you have to generate a IRN and e-way bill immediately before the material is actually being shipped. So in that particular case, you are not having any leeway in terms of the shipment that is happening, and you need to generate the invoice. Now, when we talk about the services, and if I take typically even Signet's own issue, majority of our invoices are being generated at the month end, and it is kind of only after the timesheets are being received for the services that we have rendered, we generate our invoices and send it to the clients. Now there is a leeway which is available of around 30 days in which you can generate the invoice. But if you generated the invoices before the tax filing period, so maybe before the 11th of the month, then it will be taken into the previous month. And if you have generated post that, then it is being taken into the next month. So that is a kind of a mechanism which really needs to be taken care very carefully, And it is important that whatever generate means like for the 31st March, if I want to generate whatever invoices for till the period of 31st March, it's need to be generated before 11th of April so that it can be included into the March invoice. And we had taken this up very clearly even with the GSTN authorities that if this does not happen, then actually if the invoices are taken into the next month on the date which is kind of issued and posted onto the GSTN network in maybe month of April, government will be losing out into the whole revenue. Now you take the banking industry, you take the insurance industry, all of them are going to raise the invoices in this fashion only. The banking still is not mandated to generate invoice, but that is how they generate the invoice. So this is a specific point that we wanted to highlight on.
Yes.
Tapas has also one question. So if you can answer that question from the chat box.
Yes, the question is IRP does not do a validation check of GSTN to party name. If put GSTN of X for the invoice list of the Y system does not throw any error. And honestly, this is the biggest fraud that is happening right now. And I totally agree to the point it is raised. And I have come across some of the instances wherein a B2C invoice, and this is something that we have taken up with the government, and I would say the institute also should take up with the government to really have this kind of a check in place. Because if I say I'm selling to ABC Private Limited and I put the GSTN of XYZ Limited, there is no actually check into it. And I can honestly pass on, honestly, I wouldn't put the word honestly is the correct one, but kind of fraudulently pass on the credit to some other party who has actually not purchased. So the B2C invoices can be converted into a B2 invoices by putting somebody else GSTN ID. And this is a kind of a check which is absolutely necessary to be put into place, wherein along with the name, the GSTN ID needs to be verified. And this is something in which has to be done. But the challenge for the authorities is that in our vendor system or into our vendor masters, the name may not be actually identical to what the registration has been with the GSTN authorities. So sometimes it is difficult. Means I would have said that the spelling of that particular name or the way that name has been written, or maybe a state might have been added to that particular name into the vendor master. So it is difficult to check the GSTN ID with the vendor ID. So this is something which we have also raised, and a known fact where this problem is definitely there. And I feel that a lot of challenges are going to come around it in future.
Yes, sir, we can move.
Yes. So currently the QR code is mandated for only for the B2B invoices and exports, whereas for the B2C invoices, we are just generating the dynamic QR code. So in current scenario, the B2C transactions are not being sent to IRP. It's just that we need to generate a QR code to facilitate digital payments.
And there is a lot of confusion around the B2B transactions and the B2B QR code and B2C QR code. And the question still keeps on coming in. And I think you guys would be better to kind of reply to it. But our understanding is that the B2C QR code has already been mandated. Only thing is the penalties have been kind of removed in terms of whether the applicability of B2C QR code should be there or should not be there. But B2C QR code are also mandated. And the way the structure of the B2C QR code has been put into the place, what our understanding is, it is more for a provision to facilitate payment through the UPI mode. So that is more of a reason for having the B2C QR code into the process.
One another issue here is that notification 13 by 2020 had mandated that e-invoices are required to be generated for supply of goods or services or both to registered person or for exports. So the literal interpretation here gives disconnected connotation that it's required for all the exports. So exports in terms of section 2.5, taking goods out of India. But there can be situations where we are sending goods outside India, but they are not actually supplied. This can be goods sent for exhibition, for job work, testings and all. So in these cases, we are not required to generate invoices even if the goods are moving outside India.
And there is lot of kind of a discrepancy into this particular applicability, and that is a clarification which is required.
So in case of exports, is e-invoice required to be generated or what?
Yes, Vishen sir, in case of
yes.
exports of goods or services where it is clearly you are exporting goods or services, the invoices are required to be generated.
Thank you.
Yeah. For the invoicing process, the process is kind of, we all know the process and would have gone through with it into something. So there are multiple different methodologies by which you can generate the invoice. One methodology is kind of a government has provided the utility in which you can put on all the required information and you can directly generate the invoice onto the NIC portal. That is one methodology. Or you can use a third-party software or the ERP provider himself gives a facility to generate the invoice from the ERP itself. And I think most of the accounting software providers and the ERP providers are facilitating that. But if I say a kind of a little bit of a warning signal with the latest MCA clarification or an order that has come onto the logs that are required by the accounting software, it is very important that you work with the accounting softwares which has extensively a logging mechanism in place where they are logging everything, because that is a kind of a mandatory requirement from next year onwards for the accounting software to have it. So that is a point that needs to be taken into the type of software selection or whatever is being selected by the taxpayers or by the CA fraternity onto it. Now, the invoicing process, when you receive the signed QR code and after doing the entire process, it is very important to do a check on that QR code, because we have seen duplicate QR codes already there into the market where goods have not been done, but a QR code invoice have been submitted. Now there is a NIC utility, NIC mobile app, and there are mobile apps from private players like us who have given those mobile apps by which you can check the genuinity of the QR code. So multiple 4-stage verification needs to be. First, any purchase invoice that is coming to a kind of a taxpayer, he needs to do first verify whether this particular party is falling under the invoicing or not. So that is one particular verification they need to do. Second verification they need to do whether the QR code is a kind of a genuine QR code, so it falls under all the mechanism or not. Third check we need to do is if it's an e-invoice, whether it has been reflected into the GSTR1 of the party, so automatically it will get reflected into the 2A, so that needs to be checked. And fourth check that needs to be done when the 2B is published, whether the party has paid the tax and whether it is published into the 2B or not. Only after all these 4 checks are clearly done, then you should take the credit of it for the ITC claim. And if any of these checks are missing, then there is a kind of a chances of unnecessarily back and forth with the department onto the credit that you have taken. So this is a kind of a specific point that I wanted to highlight in terms of the ITC credit that you take on the invoices.
Yes. And once we generate the invoices, the same data can be used for generating e-way bills as well. This has been done to reduce the duplication of the data. And so basically now when we generate the e-way bills using IRN, we are not allowed to change the amounts or any such thing. It has to be exactly same. Moving on, whenever we generate the e-invoice, the QR code contains the following details. It's GSTN of the supplier and the recipient, invoice number, date, value, number of line items, and the HSN code of the main product, besides the 64-digit IRN.
Now from 1st April, it is also mandated that the HSN code into all the invoices has to be minimum 6 digit, and that is something 6
digits.
That is mandated, and that is something needs to be taken care of. So a backward working in terms of whatever goods are being supplied or services being supplied, ensuring that the HSN codes are properly in place into the masters is a kind of a exercise any taxpayer needs to conclude within this short time period. So that is a one particular point that needs to be done.
So as we saw earlier, the GSTN is auto-populating the invoices in GSTR1, and this is based on the document's date. So suppose if any invoice is dated 27 March, it will be populated in the month of, it will be populated after 2 or 3 days for the return of March. But let's assume we filed the return of March on 1st April and the document date was say 29 March, right? So till that time it would not have been populated in GSTR1, and if the return is filed on 1st April, the invoice will get auto-populated in the next month's return, because that would be the open period, unless we have already reported the same document number in GSTR1.
So this again kind of is a very complex point that what Kunal is saying. And basically, if you have raised an invoice, maybe on the 29th of the month, you have filed the return on 1st April, and the invoice has not been auto-populated from the NIC to the GSTN system. It is imperative that you need to reconcile the data between the GSTN system and what your sales is between kind of 29th or before filing the return. And during this reconciliation period, if any invoices are missing of being auto-populated from the NIC system, those invoices have to be manually updated onto the GSTN portal. And that is how you will be able to make it compliant that these invoices have been uploaded and it has been taken care into the month of March. Now, what they have clarified GSTN internally is that whatever is being uploaded by the user will precede the auto population that has been done from the NIC end. So it is important that we kind of take care of it, and a reconciliation of the auto populated data that is available in the GSTR1 from the NIC and what our sales register is, that both needs to be compared. And if there are any missing invoices, until last month we have observed lots and lots of invoices were missing in getting auto populated. Now those invoices have to be manually uploaded onto the GSTN network to ensure that your sales register and the GSTR1 are matching in terms of the return that you need to file.
Also, one point here is that suppose any invoice has been auto populated and we make any changes to that. So in that case, the source e-invoice will be replaced. It will turn to blank, which means it has been manually edited, and the IRN that was generated would not be get auto-populated in GSTR2A of the recipient. So that would appear as any change, manual change done by us even in their 2A.
And when this particular situation arises, and the clients are not able to see that invoice number 1234, which was generated as an original invoice, and it has been subsequently amended or auto-populated or auto-uploaded into GSTR1. We have seen clients questioning the vendors that did you really generate an invoice or not? And in that particular case, a proper QR code printed on the invoice, which can be verified onto the NIC app, is extremely important to be provided to the client. And this type of confusions we have already seen happening, and large clients are already kind of implementing systems by which they are verifying the QR code and then only processing the invoices. So this is a kind of making it complex in the first instance for a taxpayer and for a client, but subsequently this entire complex mechanism will be made, means like it will help in terms of taking the right ITC. So the confusions at a later end will go down subsequently, but into the first process, definitely it is complex till everything gets stabilized into the system.
Another point we have seen is that there are some discrepancies in the amounts. Say, for example, NIC had clarified in one of the webinars that we can include TCS in other charges at the time of generating e-invoices. Now, the question is that some companies do not want to include this and for the purpose of GST returns and also for the e-bill. So this leads to discrepancies in the amounts that are furnished for the invoicing e-invoice and GSTR1. Also, this creates certain issues for the accounts, their accounts team, because if TCS is there, some people want it to be included in the invoices, some do not want it, and some also reconcile it with the GST returns. So as on date, we do not have clarity from the government side that whether it has to be included or not. Ideally, it's a collection under income tax act, so it may not come. But again, this leads to discrepancies.
And this discrepancy again leads to a discrepancy in terms of reconciliation, because the amount that is visible onto the GSTN portal and the amount on the actual invoice that has been entered into a system or a ERP or accounting software do not match in certain cases, and a reconciliation is required. A proper reconciliation is required to ensure that it is properly taken care of. Now, what is in this for CAs? And that is a kind of a major question comes in. And there were a lot of questions which have been raised to me personally, privately, and into multiple forums, that with all these systems coming in place and automation coming into place, will the scope and the work of a chartered accountant reduce? And my honest submission to all of you is the scope and the work of a chartered accountant is going to only increase. It is not going to reduce into this entire process. First and foremost, there can be a situation wherein the accounting software or a return filing software being used by the chartered accountant and the taxpayer may be different. And now NIC and means like NIC is allowing 2 GSPs also to be used for a single taxpayer. So a chartered accountant can use a different system than the taxpayer and at least ensure capture or kind of take this data that the taxpayer has uploaded directly from the NIC portal or from the GSTN portal and do a reconciliation before the returns are being filed. So this is a kind of a methodology or system which is possible. Invoicing generation, even if it is done directly by the client or a taxpayer, it is still requires a lot of support and attention from the chartered accountant onto that. And it can also be an outsourced activity, because for the small users, the average invoices, the B2B invoices that they will be generating per month would be around 20 to 25 only. And in that particular case, the support of a CA is extremely important. Another major factor is a reconciliation both on the sales and the purchase side in terms of e-invoice, e-waybill and GST returns both are required, and that is kind of extremely important that this is done, because if this reconciliation is not done properly, then it would kind of create a lot of hazards and return filing issues into the future. So that is a kind of major thing. The litigations are going to be more and more coming in future, and the CA support is extremely required for those litigation areas. The consultancy support is absolutely needed, because the clarifications that are coming in are challenging, and interpretation itself is a challenge in many areas. Even with the type of very close interactions that we have, and even the legal cell of GSTN supports us, but still there are many gray areas in terms of the clarification that come out. So it is important to have the right clarifications into that. So these are the areas: selection of the right tech partner and putting the tech environment within your organization is important, because then you will be able to provide better services to your client. So these are the kind of some of the major takeaways I would put it for the CS into the whole process. Now, the most important topic is, and I have been talking on to multiple forums, that all the future is going to be reconciliation, 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 and more of reconciliation. So I think reconciliation between GSTR1, reconciliation between the e-invoice that has been generated, reconciliation along with the e-waybill on the sales side is extremely important. Similar kind of reconciliation on the purchase side. And there is a methodology by which from the e-waybill and the e-invoice data, you can capture the information of the e-invoice that has been generated against you. So that is technically possible to have that information. You need to reconcile that information with the purchase data that has been entered into accounting or a ERP software. Along with that, it needs to be reconciled with what is available in 2A and what is available in 2B. And if you do this 4-way reconciliation, then only you can take the proper ITC credit, which is eligible to the taxpayer. So this is a kind of a headache for the taxpayer, and it is kind of important for the chartered accountants to really support and help into this process. Anything? Yeah. So these are some of the major points in terms of the reconciliation that needs to be do. This is some small guidance onto it. Okay, look at the partner wherein your effort is minimal and kind of minimized. So that is when you select the technology, it is important to select the right technology. At least look at it whether all the aspects of the sales side and the purchase side are covered and entire automation is done onto the process or not. And bulk document printings are required, QR code verification is required. There are multiple different things that needs to be done, and it is important that that is kind of done. Even the synchronization between the ERP, SAP systems, the tally systems, and the account means like the return filing systems is extremely important, and more automation is done into it. It is important. So I was joking with some of our foreign chartered accountant friends, and we have said that the CAs now are going to be more of a technology advisors to their clients and not only remain as a tax advisor, because it is extremely important that the right guidance is provided in terms of what technology selection a person needs to do, so that the load onto them kind of reduces to the minimum. I think this is all from our side, Bishan sir, and any questions that our CA friends have, it will be more than happy to reply to the what we can do into this dynamic invoicing world.
Yes, Neeraj bhai. Now the question in my mind is that in case of a foreign service provider like exporters, as a service provider, we used to generate invoice in foreign currency. So now in this e-invoicing, it's not possible for me to generate invoice in foreign currency. That is what I understand. So previously, before e-invoicing, we used to generate export invoice, that is commercial invoice, and tax invoice, which we are required to give to the department if we are taking refund with the payment, export with payment of IGST. So in current scenario, what will happen? Like, shall I give the e-invoice to my client in foreign country or commercial invoice?
I think you will still have to give a commercial invoice to the client into the foreign company attached with the invoice that you have generated, because still some of the ERPs are showing both the currency transactions, the foreign currency transaction, as well as the Indian rupee rate into the same invoice. But most of the accounting softwares are not being able to do that. And in that particular case, you will have to still create two separate invoices, because for the foreign remittance that is going to come from the client, you will have to give him a commercial foreign currency invoice. But basically, as an annexure or as an attachment, you should attach the invoice into the same document set, so that in future any complications come in, they would also have the copy of it, or that also will be available with your bankers when the remittance comes in. Because even with your bankers in future, because if you are going to take loan against that particular invoice, or a trade finance is going to be done onto that invoice, the bankers are going to ask for the e-invoice into that process. That is what I am seeing the banking industry maturing to that. And in that particular area, it is important that both the invoices are shared into it.
Sir, as Tapas Ruparelia has pointed out that if I am mentioning GST or I am getting an invoice where GST number of some other supplier is mentioned, and that is possible, that what we have discussed. So is there any software which prevent those type of or which are having embedded controls in it, which just pop out that key, there is a mismatch in this invoice when I am taking the credit?
Yes, I think most of the softwares should be having this facility. The accounting software also should be having this facility when they upload the masters. The ERPs also have it. And what we have implemented at our end is a specific checks which can be mandated by the what we call these systems are basically, they are the checker systems. And this type of kind of alerts can be really maintained or monitored, by which it will give a pop-up in terms of this type of discrepancy is there. And this will kind of create a major challenge. And this particular problem is something for which post the transaction has been done, it is very difficult to identify or give a kind of a automation solution into it. But as you rightly pointed out, during the preparation of those invoices, this type of checks are possible to be. I think, sorry, we could.
Yeah, you're muted. You repeat it, please. Apologies.
So yeah. That is possible during the generation of this invoices. And I would put it across to look from a kind of a different angle. So that if I'm a kind of a taxpayer who is mostly supplying to a B2C market, and I have a kind of a point of sale system or something by which I'm generating hundreds of invoices, and some particular employee of mine just wants to play around with it and create a fraud into the system. He just puts a tax, a GSTN ID of a XYZ party into all of those invoices, and it gets uploaded as a B2B invoice onto the GSTN portal. The name is of a different party and the GSTN is something else. And suddenly, as a recipient party, I receive all those invoices into my thing. It's going to be a major challenge for multiple different taxpayers into the process. So definitely this particular angle needs to be attended. But right now, I don't see any solution from the NIC side or GSTN side onto it. Individual softwares, which are the intermediary ones like ours, do provide facilities for the verification of this. So that kind of system has to be put into place.
Neeraj sir, when we are talking, like most of us are using Tally software, and in Tally Prime, they are giving us facility to generate e-invoice. And as a GSP, you being a GSP, how you see that, whether a person, what are the benefits if we are using a particular GSP or a Tally Prime? What are the pros and cons of it?
So I always say accounting software or a ERP system is a maker system, and what we provide is a checker system. So you can generate the invoice directly, and even government has provided 8 different systems free of cost from the GSTN portal, ours being one of them, called Phase. So that is kind of, it is very easy to kind of download those systems and generate the invoices even through it. But the challenge is the problems that are not being identified during the maker systems will be verified and identified as a checker system. And it is extremely important the way a taxpayer is generating the documents, but a chartered accountant is required to check what is being filed onto the GSTN portal. Similarly, a maker system and a checker system is required in every aspect, by which what is being generated from the Tally system or any accounting software gets checked onto that. And lot of people have used a Tally connector or used the Tally system to generate the invoice, but at the same time used our portal to verify what they have generated is right, wrong, correct. And second thing is the reconciliation part. What is the most important, what GSTN has prescribed, that you download the dump of the e-invoices that has been generated and auto-populated onto the GSTR1, compare it with your sales register, and both this comparison, once that is done, then only you upload that onto the GSTR1 system. Now this, for this particular thing to happen, you need a checker system in place. So that is what we showed into our presentation, that this 3-way reconciliation is important in to be done in a checker system, even if you are generating the invoices from a Tally or any other accounting software.
Yes, Neeraj bhai, there is one questions with regard to RCM. In case of reverse charge mechanism, we have to generate self invoice. So when we are talking about e-invoicing, is Is it required to generate e-invoice for self-invoice?
I think the understanding is it is not required to generate an e-invoice for a reverse charge mechanism, but I have personally into multiple different meetings at GSTN and with NIC and multiple things. I have seen diverse view of it, and we cannot really conclude. They have clarified. Yeah, Kunal says they have very clearly clarified that for reverse charge mechanism, e-invoice is not required to be generated.
Perfect, perfect. Tapas, if you are there. Okay, so Tapas.
Yes, sir, I'm there.
Yes, yes, please. So can you ask your, or can you
Yeah,
give
sure.
your inputs?
I was just checking, sir. You said that there is a possibility that these checks can be implemented, but do these checks come in picture in any software at the time of generating the invoice, or is it a one-time exercise that one should do while implementing this e-invoicing and check their vendor masters thoroughly? So my question is, when we are saying that, of course, the NIC portal doesn't give this facility, but if somebody wants to implement this, is it possible that a software gives these kind of validation checks at the time of generation of each e-invoice, or an entire exercise of vendor sanitization has to happen?
So a lot of softwares provide these facilities, and how this works is like the vendor master, when you are generating, the rights of the vendor master generation and editing should not be available to everybody. So it is kind of, you sanitize the vendor master when the vendor master is being created. And when a new kind of a customer comes in, so new kind of a, even a customer comes in and we are adding his GSTN information into the masters, then that has to be done by a proper authorization, and a verification maker checker concept has to be put into place. Now, when this particular system, the invoicing is being done, most of the advanced ERPs or accounting systems will provide you a facility by which you do not allow editing to be happened during the times of a sales invoice into that. So if somebody is generating a B2C invoice, then he cannot edit the GST filled into it. And that will ensure that he cannot play around with it. And whatever data comes from the master, the same GSTN ID he has to populate to the GSTN network. So it is depending on what software or what ERP you are using, but a lot of them provide this type of roles and rights by which you can restrict the kind of editing that can be done during the transaction time into the masters, and by prevention of that, this particular thing definitely can be taken care of.
So if at all the master is incorrect and when we are generating this invoice, so my question was from that aspect, that if, let's say, some of the vendors were not properly sanitized and the name and GSTN are not matching, the example which we said ABC to XYZ, is it possible to have a check at the time of then uploading this invoice? Or you are saying that at the time of uploading, if at all the error is thrown, then it's prone to changing of this details, and that should not be advisable, is what you are trying to say?
No, the type of editing during even the generation of the invoice or the filing of the return, a pop-up facility in terms of kind of identification, what was the number or the name as per the GSTN data and what has been shown into the invoice, that type of advanced facility is possible to be provided into the checking system. So that is something possible. But a master sanitization is something which is extremely critical and extremely important, and the sooner it is done, the better it is.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
I guess there are no other questions by the participants currently. And as sir, you have said that there will be a four-way reconciliation. Previously we were used to have a three-way calculation, GSTR 1, 3B, and books of accounts. Now it will be e-invoice portal, I guess e-way bill also. So maybe what you have said, reconciliation, reconciliation, and reconciliation. So I guess everyone present here must be benefited with this deliberation, and your discussion has given sight how we should give some more services to our clients or value addition though GST audit will be there or not, our role as a chartered accountant in reconciliation and advising our client will be much more with advent of this e-invoicing and technology. Sir, I also remember the time when we were implementing GST. At that time, many big firms are also having technology experts in their team. But we, as a small or medium firm, are not required, are not having technology people with us. But I guess with you are based in Ahmedabad and based GSP, we can definitely take benefit of your services and knowledge in so far as the technology is concerned, and advise and give a composite supply to the client, I can say, in advising for the GST solutions. Sir, now with this, I request CA Dhaval Rawal sir to give well-deserved vote of thanks to Neeraj Hatti Singh ji.
Yes, sir. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I, CA Dhaval Rawal, on behalf of Ahmedabad branch ICAI, express our vote of thanks to today's faculty and a very good speaker, Sri Neeraj Hatti Singh ji, as well as CA Kunal Bhai for a wonderful company to him, and especially for enriching all of us with the wonderful practical aspect on the very important topic, today's topic, that is e-invoicing, and especially wonderful presentations on the topic. And for all of us, the members, thank you very much, sir. I also would like to thank the Ahmedabad branch chairman, sir, CA Harit Dhariwal bhai, vice chairman Sri Vishan bhai, for organizing such a wonderful sessions and getting a very eminent faculty for each of the topic for our faculty and for our entire all our members for a wonderful sessions. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much all present here, and we will see you soon in vaccine drive also today and tomorrow. So please do take the benefit of our vaccination drive. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you very much. We are ending this virtual meeting here. Thank you.